Welcome to the Life and Faith Podcast. I'm Dan.
And I'm Josh.
We're experiencing life and faith every day, and if you're listening, we hope you are too. We're talking about life, the Bible, family, news, all sorts of other stuff, all from the perspective of by-faith believers. If you enjoyed this conversation, like what you hear, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to a new episode of the Life and Faith Podcast. Today we have a special guest with us. His name is Bennie Bullock. He is an author of a book called God's Plan and God's Hornets. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. Good. Well, welcome. I want to let you know I read the book this week.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Josh ordered it for me and had it sent to me, and it got to me on Sunday night, and I started on Monday, and I was like, I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to have it read. I finished the last 10 pages last night. It was very interesting, very cool, very good story.
You.
Yeah.
Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the book, if you will. I mean, you don't have to spoil the ending. I mean, but but if you want to just say a little bit about it, or maybe just what it's about.
It's about some things that God did in my life and in my wife's life while we were dating. It's the story of how we met and how God worked in our lives to bring us to the point where we knew we should be married to each other. It took a lot of going from point A to point B is kind of what I would always think that how the progress goes in relationships like that, when you go from meeting until you get to where you know you want to be married. But God had other plans. He didn't want us to go from point A to point B. He had us to go from point A to point Z, and there's a lot of other steps along the way. Some of them were linear, and some of them were not linear at all. Some of them went backwards, some of them went up, and some of them went down. And it was a journey that He took us on, but we learned something at every step.
That's great. It was easy to read, and I felt like after I got done with it that I knew you, even though I had never met you.
Yeah.
Because, you were just speaking from the heart, I felt.
Yes.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to write? And I mean, what was the process of sort of coming to the point where you thought, I want to write this out? What brought you to the point of becoming an author?
I always knew that what God did in our lives was a great testimony to others. Every time I get a chance to tell them, what God had done, I always like to put some things on Facebook every once in a while about the history of our relationship, and I kept getting other people tell me, you should write a book about that. And in the back of my mind, I always knew that I would like to do that, but I didn't think I could. And finally, at some point, God told me back in 2017, I felt like God was directing me in that direction. I had heard enough people tell me that I thought, well, I should at least try this. So I started it in the fall of 2017. It took close to a year to get all the writing done, and then I started going back and redoing some of it and editing it, and that took several months as well. And then I had to look for a publisher, and found through praying about that, I found one that I thought God was directing me to. So that process took another 8 or 9 months for them to get it, to read it, to do their editing and get back with me on the editing. And then I got back with them about, what they thought they wanted to change. So we did that, and that took another 8 months or so. And that took me to about September 2019. That's when it got published.
All right, so I get the unique perspective here of reading through this book, and I really get a history of what happened with my mom and dad. So it's cool from that perspective. But I feel like a lot of what you draw, especially in conclusion of the book, it talks about how there's a bigger picture, right?
Yes.
In a moment you were thinking about you and mom. But then now, looking back in hindsight, you can see that God had this whole big picture in mind. I'd like to read what you wrote in my book
Okay.
because I know we all got a copy of it, and this put it in a good perspective for me. So I just like to share that with the audience here because I think it's said in the back of the book, but I feel like this puts it well. So he wrote, Joshua, I hope you enjoy this book about the amazing things God did in my life and in your mom's life to bring us together. It is not really my story or our story. It is God's story. He did these amazing things not only for your mom and me, but for you, Elizabeth and Daniel, and your spouses. He also did them for all of your children and grandchildren, and for their spouses. God had the big picture in mind all along. While I concentrated on what was going on at the time, God was concerned with many generations to come and with how each member of those generations could bring him honor and glory. My prayer is that each of my descendants will read this book and learn from the lessons that God taught me. And I think that that's such a good perspective, because I think that sets the tone. If somebody's reading this, they not only can learn from the things that you went through, the things that God brought you through, but hopefully they get this perspective that not only does God have a specific will, because I think that comes up a lot in the book about
Yes.
God's specific will for us, but not only does he have a specific will for me, but he has in mind all the ripple effects throughout the generations to come.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. That when I was struggling back during that time we were dating, because I fell in love with Donna a long time before she fell in love with me. She wasn't looking for anything serious at all, and I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found what I was looking for right away without knowing I was looking for it, because I fell in love with her within a few weeks of meeting. And so I had a lot of struggles during the 1981 with that, because I wanted her to fall in love with me and feel the same way about me. So I was concentrating on that, and maybe possibly one day be able to get married as well. And I was worried about, well, is God going to do this, and can he do it? And of course, I learned very quickly what he could do. But he had a much bigger perspective in mind. He knew all along, when I was all concerned about her falling in love with me, that that's no problem for him at all. And he was going to do that. And he was looking down the line at you kids and y'all's kids and several generations, however long it takes him to come back. And he knew that the things I would learn, I would be able to teach y'all and help y'all, and y'all would see it. And that's what I hope to do in this book. I come across some advice from someone who did a lot of writing beforehand, and he said you should have 3 purposes in writing as a Christian, and I developed that myself, and those good ideas. And the first one is to exalt the Savior, to show just how good God is, and give him the glory for what he's done. The next is to exhort the saints, to be able to help other Christians to learn from my lessons and where I made mistakes, and learn not to make those mistakes, and learn how to live their lives in the right way. And the third is to evangelize the sinners, so that, your testimony is a great witness tool to other people. If that you can show them what God has done in your life and how he's made a difference, that's the best kind of testimony to have, to help others to see their need for a Savior. So I think those 3 things in mind, I kept those in mind as I wrote the book.
Can you talk a little bit about how faith has sort of impacted your journey, or how having faith throughout it has been impactful?
Well, it took me a while to realize just how God could work in our relationship. It took me getting to the point where I realized, hey, I may lose her, but I really don't want to. I had to turn to God and ask him to make sure that he wanted me to date her to begin with, because I realized early on, I realized later, that I never stopped once when I entered into a relationship with her and asked God, hey, do you want me to date her? Should I date her? I just assumed at that time, because I didn't think of God's will as being a specific thing. I thought as being just in general. I thought, if I'm willing to just date a Christian girl, that's all God wants. If I can date any Christian girl I want to, and that's God's will, but God has a specific will. He doesn't look down and say, hey, I just want you to marry a good person. He has someone in mind for me. And I had to grow in faith to realize that, and to realize, well, that means I need to be patient. And that's one of the things I learned the most is waiting on God. Because when you wait on God, God can do a lot of things in your life, in your spirit. If you're waiting on him to do something, then you have to show the faith that he's going to do it. So that grows your faith in the waiting. And also during the waiting, he takes you to all those other points I was talking about and helps you to learn this and this principle and that principle. And that grows your faith a lot when you see how God can move in people's lives, and he can change things as he wants to in his timing, and he can do it. And it helps your faith tremendously. A lot of times throughout my life, I've looked back on the things that God did back during that time that I wrote about, and I can use what I learned back then to give me the faith that he can take care of things now as well.
I like how the book starts out as far as it says, so the first chapter is called God Has a Plan. And there's a line here that you put kind of talking about how, God has a plan for our life, and it's almost like an artist with an easel.
Yes.
And sometimes what we perceive as a stray mark is really a part of, sometimes you're looking at an artist when they're drawing something, you can't quite picture what it is that they're working on. But then eventually, once it's finished, you see the whole picture.
Yes.
And this line that I'm referring to here is, it can be tempting to ask God why he is coloring outside of the lines that we think should be there. And then you go on to say, he never makes a wrong mark. Now I know that there's, probably because I grew up in your house, I know like kind of the inspiration for that line.
Yes.
There's a song, I think it's by Glad. Is that right?
Color Outside the Lines.
Color Outside the Lines. So I guess because this first chapter kind of sets up before you ever met Mom, you had this other girl in mind. And
Yes.
I feel like that sets it up well. So can you speak a little bit to that and how you were going down what you thought was maybe God's will at first, but then you realized it was a little bit different?
Yes, there was actually 2 young ladies that went to my church in the last year and a half, 2 years before I met your mom. And one of them I developed a real, kind of a crush on, but she didn't hang around long. She eventually left town, and so I gave up on her at that point. But then eventually I turned my attention to my pastor's daughter, and she was a Christian. And like I said, I dealt in generalities of God's will. I thought, well, she's a good Christian young lady. She's the pastor's daughter, so God would be happy with me if I'd be interested in her. So I kept praying and asking God over the course of a few months, maybe a year. Her name was Kay, and I kept asking God to work things out between me and Kay. And we become friends, but she never once acted like she wanted to be anything more than friends. And I was right. I was keeping a journal at the time, which turned out to be a great help to me in writing the book. And most of the entries I made in the months leading up to meeting your mom was about Kay and me begging God to work things out, because I thought that had to be his will. But I never once heard him tell me in my spirit, yes, she's the one, you can pursue her. And then she turned out to be the one to introduce me to your mother. I got to church one Wednesday evening, and I thought we were actually getting a lot closer. I thought it was getting closer to the point where I might be able to ask her out. And she said, Benny, come here, I got something to tell you. And so she pulled me over to the side outside of church, and she said, hey, I signed up for classes. She was going to a new high school that year. So I just signed up for classes the other day. I met a friend of Deborah's, and Deborah went to our church as well. And she said, I think you and her would make a great couple. And she told me that, and it just crushed me, because this girl that I had a crush on for months, and I thought we were getting closer, to maybe being boyfriend and girlfriend, and then she wants me to meet someone else. There's nothing worse she could have told me. So the rest of the evening, that's all I could think about. And I went home and I wrote in my journal, and it's basically a pity party about what had happened to me. And I remember I closed that entry out. I said, I don't know, maybe God has something planned for me and this Donna. And boy, did he have something planned.
I really like how that was kind of a theme throughout it. And I think, even not to get ahead of ourselves here, but at the end of the book, it's like, boy, did he ever have a plan for us.
Yes.
So I like how it began and kind of ended with that idea. God said, what you're using is kind of maybe a sarcasm.
Yeah.
He made it flourish. So
yeah, he put the words in my heart, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess from here we get into, there's several chapters about the course of you dating and how God started working all that. But really, I guess the first hurdle, things started off really great, and then suddenly you realized things are backing off, and there's a reason for that. And you write in here that looking back, you feel like God probably kept you in the dark about some of those things that were going on.
Yeah.
So explain kind of what was going on, the gist of it, and how you felt like God was helping you navigate that.
Well, just before Donna and I met, her mother had encouraged her to start writing this young man who had moved off to another state, to Arkansas. And she had kind of had a small crush on him before he left. But she didn't think nothing of it. But when her mom encouraged her to write him, because he wrote her mom, and he was lonely because he didn't have any friends there. So she started writing him, and they developed kind of relationship, through the mail, writing. So she kind of liked him to begin with. But once she dated me, she started dating me because she didn't think he was ever going to be here again. He was ever going to show up in her life again. Well, we started dating November 8th, 1980, and by middle of December, she knew he was coming back to town. So that changed everything. We were dating every week. We went somewhere. 1 week we went 2 different places. And then all of a sudden I asked her to go out on the 13th of December, and she said, no, I got to do such and such. And I didn't think nothing, major about that. She wasn't going to be available every weekend just because she had been the last few weekends. But then the next weekend, I asked her out for somewhere that afternoon, and she couldn't do it. And then I asked her out that evening, and she had a good reason the other 2 times. But that evening, when I asked her out, she said, well, I just shouldn't. So I started worrying at that point, because I wanted to see her, and I was afraid she didn't want to see me again. So I asked her the following Monday. I said, because she was out of school for a Christmas break, and I asked her if she could go somewhere that day before I went to work that evening. And she turned me down then, but I'd asked her to go skating because we went skating a lot earlier in our roller skating in our relationship. And she said, no, I'm already going skating. I'm going to go with my sisters and a friend of mine. And she said, he's in town from the Ozarks. And she mentioned that it was a guy. And so that just floored me. I thought, oh no. And so I said, okay. But then I began to think, why is this bothering me so much? And I realized it was bothering me because I was falling in love with her. And I was thinking, I didn't even know this girl a few weeks ago. And yet now, here she wants to not see me for a couple of weeks and just tear me apart. And I'd never been in love before, but I think God was helping me to see, yeah, you're in love with her. So this guy, his name was Steve, and he comes into town, and he has no place to stay. So her parents let him move into their house. So now she's got a boyfriend that she's going to see every day. And like I said, she wasn't looking for anything serious, but she liked this guy. She liked me enough to date me. And so over the next course of the next few months, things changed. Whereas we were seeing each other every week, now it's maybe 2-3 weeks in between each date. And eventually, the friend of mine that introduced this case, she told me, this is in late January of the next year in 81. She said, I sure am glad that that Donna chose you over Steve. And I thought, well, that's good, but I didn't know she was making a choice. I didn't know he was into the conversation at that point, because I was seeing her again, and I didn't know she still liked him. So I thought at that point that they were done, but they weren't. But God kept all that from me. I didn't know that until several months later, when she was going to go somewhere in a school function, and I actually asked her out to it, and she said, no, I'm already going. I asked her who she's going with, and she told me Steve. And then I realized at that point, hey, I've got a battle foe on my hands. I've got someone who's vying for the same thing I am. And
that you were fighting that battle even not knowingly for a little while.
Not knowing just how deep of a battle it was. And the thing about it is that everybody in her life, as far as her family, they knew this other guy much better than me. And he's a friend of the family that grew up in the neighborhood with her brothers, and I felt like everybody was against me, that everybody wanted him to win out.
You were kind of the underdog in that situation.
Yes, I definitely felt like the underdog. But that's where God wanted me to, that's how he wanted me to feel. He wanted me to get to the end of myself so I can start depending on him.
Yeah, I really like how you put that. And I heard something recently that really stood out to me that I think is kind of getting at that same message. And it's that sometimes when we're in something that feels like it's not a good situation, or we really want to get away from it, that's kind of the impulse. But the way this person described it was God has furnaces for us in our life, and
yes.
How the Bible all through it talks about how he's refining us, he's getting out impurities, and there's trials that come our way, but it's for our benefit. And so without even knowing it, you were going through that furnace, and maybe you didn't know quite how hot that furnace was. Yes. Even going through it.
Yeah, God knew that if I knew how tough the battle was, I'd give up. In fact, I thought when I first found out that she was interested in this other guy, and she had not went out with me a couple of weeks, and she didn't have a really good excuse, I thought that meant it was over. That I thought God was using circumstances to show me, hey, you quit dating her now. I'm not in that. That's one of the biggest lessons I learned throughout the book is don't look at circumstances as being guideposts to go by. View them as hurdles that God can get over. God can bring you through. They're there a lot of times, and certainly God can use circumstances, but a lot of times he doesn't. A lot of times he wants to show you how you can, through faith, how you can overcome the circumstances. And that was a big lesson for me, because I just naturally thought, my natural inclination was, well, this is over. But God had other plans. He didn't want me to give up. And every time I prayed about it, thinking that's what God wanted, I felt like God in my spirit was telling me, no, don't give up on her. Keep pursuing her. And I had to ask God that over and over again before I finally developed a faith strong enough to actually believe what he said.
Well, you also see that alongside this situation in your relationship is kind of growing it at its own rate or at its own pace. She's not giving up either, but also you talk about how you're growing in your faith apart from that situation. For example, you say, at that time I began listening to Christian music exclusively, right? Or you said, like, even in the later chapters, it's like the idea of being a spiritual leader in the home became a bigger focus in my life than it was previously. So you see where you're kind of growing alongside of that relationship, even though it's kind of intertwined, but it's not the way it is obviously today, or it wasn't like growing at maybe the rate that you would, in the way that you would hope.
Yes.
But yet you're growing, it's growing, you're growing side by side. Can you talk about how, like, for example, the choice to listen to Christian music exclusively influenced you, or how, talk about maybe just that spiritual growth path that you were on apart from that relationship?
Yes, God actually started me learning those things even before I met Donna. Throughout high school, God was working on me, giving me convictions and saying, the music you're listening to is not right. And from my freshman year up through my senior year, I kind of changed genres of music because I got tired of that one because I didn't like the words in that music. And the time I got to my senior year, I was mainly listening to just instrumental music, jazz and stuff like that, because my spirit was bothering me. It bothered me to hear the words and the message in those songs. And I remember one day, it was during spring break. We used to always have spring break the week following Easter. So it was the day after Easter, it was a Monday in April before I met Donna later that year. And I thought, well, I'm having all these hard times finding something to listen to. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to go up and down the AM dial, because FM wasn't that big of a deal back then. Go up and down the AM dial and listen to every station and see if I can find something I like, a station that I like better, or new one or something. One I can have to, I can switch. If the song comes on I don't like, I can switch to another station and find as many as I could. Well, I got about 2/3 of the way down the dial, and I found this little bitty weak station, 1040 AM, called KPBC. It was so weak that they had to drop off the air at night because another station in the country had a clear channel, so they couldn't even operate at night. But they were playing Christian music. I'd never heard Christian music on the radio before. And I thought, well, that's a good song. I like that. So I kept listening. And the more I listened, the more I liked it. And from that point on, that was my main source of music. And within a few weeks, I started buying Christian albums. And I started getting interested in that. And within a few weeks of starting listening to Christian music, I wasn't listening to secular music at all. And God knew that I needed that. He had worked on my entertainment also during high school, and I'd gotten to where I wasn't going to any movies whatsoever by the time I finished high school, because God had convicted me enough about that. I wasn't watching hardly any TV. But God knew I needed that in my life so I could hear him better, because those kind of things keep us from hearing God's Spirit. It conforms us to the world. And that's the lesson that God was bringing me through without me even knowing it. And it's preparing me for when I met Donna, because sometimes you listen to secular music and it has the wrong message, even if it's not something that's over the top inappropriate. I mean, it's just the philosophy of life, how they say you should live, how they think relationships should work. I mean, secular music is full of songs about relationships and romance. And I can't imagine where I'd been in my life when I went through that with Donna had I had those kind of influence in my life.
Yeah, I think that's such an important element to this story, and it's an important element really to everyone, because of how music impacts you. God is keenly aware of how music impacts you, and
yes.
I think even Satan knows music really well and is crafty enough that he knows what would appeal to us and what can get us off track as far as our listening to music. But I think you touched on this a little bit, but many times people will be listening to music and saying, well, what's wrong with this?
Yes.
Rather than taking the different approach as to, well, what's right with what I'm listening to. And you could have easily, if God hadn't worked on that prior to your relationship that you had entered with Mom, then you could have easily been listening to something that had to do with, broken hearts. And there's plenty of stuff out there in the world about
yes.
drowning your sorrows in alcohol, for example, or just even if it has nothing to do with any other substances, just kind of wallowing in self-pity.
And having like thoughts of revenge on the person who did you wrong in love and stuff like that too.
Yeah. There's something to listening to music that tempts you to just kind of dwell on the negative, versus I think what you spoke to a lot in the book about people. There was some songs that you listed in there that not only did it acknowledge, yes, you may be going through this hard time, but then here, let's guide your focus back to God. And you're not going to get that from listening to country music or something
No, not
else.
at all.
Yeah.
That's why I devoted a whole chapter in my book to the effect that music had on me within that relationship, and just what it did for me. I remember listening to those songs that I wrote about, and when I bought that album that had those songs on it that deeply affected me and helped me through that time, I didn't even buy them because of those songs. I bought them because of a couple other songs. They're about other things. But that's what happens when you put good Christian music in your life, in your heart. It helps you to develop things, and you know where to turn. You know what to think about. You can listen to secular music, and you can find, like I was trying to do, this song doesn't have any cussing in it. This song doesn't talk about cheating on somebody. This song's not talking about drinking. And you can get a few of those, but and even the best of them, I liken it to, like, if you had 2 barrels to choose from, you had 30 seconds to get everything you could out of that one barrel. One barrel is full of pennies and nickels and dimes, and the other barrel is full of dollar bills and $5 bills. And you could only go to one barrel and get what you could. And that's the way life is. You only have 24 hours in a day. So you only have so much time to listen to music. So why not listen to what's going to help you the most? And even if something doesn't hurt you, it's not going to help you. And why not go to and listen to music that talks about God and reinforces what you read in your Bible, reinforces sermons that you hear? Why not do that? Because it makes so much more sense to go to that barrel and fill up from that instead of the lesser things.
You've been listening to the Life and Faith podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Stay up to date on all our episodes, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.